Did you know that Texas has executed more people than any other state in the U.S. since 1976? With over 500 executions to its name, Texas has become the epicenter of the death penalty in America. But what if I told you that one of these executions left behind more questions than answers? What if it's a case that still haunts the public and the justice system to this day? This isn't just another death penalty case. The execution of Christopher Anthony Young is a story that raises important questions about fairness, justice, and whether we've got the system right. It's not about a man who committed a crime and was punished. This is about a young man whose fate became the center of public outrage, legal battles, and intense debate over whether the right decision was made. Was justice truly served, or was there something deeper lurking behind his execution? The emotional toll of this case was felt not only by the victim's family but also by the family of the condemned man. Imagine having to watch your loved one walk to their death. The public was torn, the courts were divided, and the execution date was drawing near. What would happen when the system reached its breaking point? Stick with me, because what I'm about to tell you about Christopher Young's execution is going to make you question everything. There's more to this story than anyone ever expected. Christopher Anthony Young was just 19 years old when he committed a crime that would ultimately lead to his death. On November 9, 2004, Young and an accomplice, 𝗲𝗟 entered a convenience store in San Antonio, Texas, with one thing on their mind: robbery. But that simple plan quickly escalated into something far more tragic when Young shot and killed the store owner, Hasmukh Patel, in cold blood. At first glance, this seemed like a clear-cut case. A young man, attempting a robbery, panicked, and killed an innocent person. It made sense to the public. This was just another case of justice needing to be served. But what if the truth wasn't so simple? Young's troubled past and the harsh environment he grew up in made it hard for some to understand his actions. Could this be the story of a man who never had a chance? Or was it just another case of a dangerous criminal who needed to be stopped? The answer wasn't as clear-cut as many believed. In the courtroom, his defense attorneys argued that Young's age, intellectual capacity, and emotional struggles should have been considered when sentencing him to death. They fought for his life, bringing forward claims of an intellectual disability that would, under the law, prevent his execution. But despite their efforts, the wheels of justice continued to turn relentlessly toward his death. It's easy to assume that this case was straightforward: crime, conviction, death. But there's so much more beneath the surface. The emotional plea from the victim's family, who expressed forgiveness, created a divide among those who believed in the death penalty and those who didn't. And then, as his execution date loomed, something unexpected happened. Just days before Christopher Young was set to be executed, new evidence came to light. A detail that could have saved his life. Something no one saw coming. The question on everyone's mind was, would it make a difference? Could this new revelation be enough to stop the inevitable? The tension was palpable. Some saw this as a final shot at redemption for Young. Others saw it as a last-ditch attempt to delay the inevitable. But one thing was certain: Young's fate was in the hands of those who would ultimately decide whether he lived or died. And the clock was ticking. His execution was not just a headline. It became a conversation about morality, fairness, and the price of justice. Was this man truly deserving of death, or had the system failed him? Stay with me, because in the next few moments, I'm going to take you inside the last moments of Christopher Young's life, and reveal something that will change how you think about this case forever. What happened in the final hours leading up to his death? You won't believe the twist this story is about to take. But before we continue, I want to hear from you. Do you think Christopher Young's execution was justified? Was justice served, or was the system flawed? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, let's discuss it. I just want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for your support. Your likes, comments, and shares mean the world to me. Together, we're not just learning about justice, we're striving to understand it and make our voices heard. If you're new here, I'd love for you to join our community, so hit that subscribe button and be part of the conversation. Together, we can keep digging deep, questioning, and seeking the truth. We've all heard the phrase, Texas justice, right? It's got a reputation for being fast and tough, especially when it comes to executions. And when Christopher Young was sentenced to death, that justice was about to be put into action. The date was set. But what happened in those final days before the execution left more than just a few people questioning the system. This wasn't just another execution to check off the list. This was a young man, just 19, who had made mistakes, yes, but could that be the whole story? What if there were things no one knew, things that might have spared his life? Could we really be sure that the right call was made? Or had the state of Texas rushed to execute a man without considering everything? Young's case didn't just raise eyebrows in the courtroom. It caught the attention of people from all walks of life, activists, attorneys, and even those who felt like the justice system was working exactly the way it was supposed to. There was no shortage of opinions about the death penalty, but for those closest to the case, it became a question of whether Young deserved to die for a crime committed when he was barely out of his teenage years. It was a classic case of Texas justice, one where the law was clear, but the story behind the man wasn't. The victim's family had expressed forgiveness for Young, pleading with the courts to reconsider his execution. But the law, and the court system, had already made up its mind. And in the end, it would be the state, not the families, who had the final say. But then, just days before the execution, something happened. Something unexpected that would change everything. And just like that, a simple robbery gone wrong became something far more complicated. The truth, as it always does, was buried beneath the surface. But now, with the clock ticking down, could anyone find a way to stop the inevitable? In those last days before the execution, Young's legal team filed one last appeal. They argued that there were significant issues with his case, especially concerning his intellectual capacity. But time was running out, and the process was already set in motion. No one was sure if this last-minute appeal would make a difference. Could they really stop an execution with so little time left? Then, hours before the lethal injection was to be administered, an emotional plea came from an unexpected source. The victim's family, despite everything that had happened, still didn't want Young to die. They begged the state to reconsider. Could their request make any difference? Could the voice of the family change the mind of the authorities? Was there any chance of mercy? But this wasn't just about mercy anymore. This was about what kind of society we want to live in. Should we be in the business of deciding who lives and who dies? Was there room for redemption? Or was the system too far gone to allow for such a thing? And then, as the hours drew closer, a piece of the story that no one expected began to emerge. A piece of evidence, an overlooked detail, came to light. Something that could have turned the whole case upside down. Could it be enough to save Young's life? Or was it just too little, too late? Stay with me because, in just a few moments, I'm going to reveal what this shocking new piece of information was and whether it made any difference in the end. You won't believe what was uncovered just before time ran out. And remember, before we continue, I want to hear from you. Do you think Christopher Young should have been spared, or was his execution the right call? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep this conversation going. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a deep dive into the cases that really make us think. The night before Christopher Young was set to die, the tension was thick. Everyone was waiting. But waiting for what? A death? A last-minute miracle? What could change in the final hours? Texas law is clear on one thing: the process moves fast. But in this case, the clock was ticking down on a life, and with each passing minute, there was still no certainty. As the hours before the execution slipped by, Young's fate seemed sealed. His appeals had been denied. The courts had weighed in, and the execution was scheduled. But there was one thing no one expected to happen. It was the kind of twist you see in movies, but this time, it was real life. What would happen when that twist came to light? A few days earlier, Young's attorneys had filed a clemency petition, asking for mercy on the grounds of his rehabilitation and his efforts to change. Young wasn't just sitting on death row. He had worked hard to better himself, to mentor other inmates, and to show the world that he was no longer the same person who had taken a life years before. His defense team argued that this transformation should be taken into account. After all, isn't redemption part of the human experience? Yet, despite all of that, the clock kept ticking. And there was something heartbreaking about the situation, something more than just the crime, more than the punishment. It was the story of a young man who seemed to have been forgotten by the very system that was supposed to protect and rehabilitate him. It was a race against time, but time seemed to be running out for Young. Then, a moment before midnight, the news hit. New evidence had come to light, just hours before the execution was scheduled. This was the unexpected twist. It wasn't a game-changer in the sense that it was new physical evidence or a confession that could prove innocence, but it was a revelation that raised questions about the fairness of his trial. It wasn't just the legal arguments that mattered anymore, it was about whether justice had been truly served. What did this new piece of evidence say? What could it possibly be? Well, it wasn't a smoking gun, but it was significant enough that the clemency petition was revisited. The evidence raised doubts about the quality of legal representation Young had received at trial and the way his intellectual abilities were evaluated. Was it enough to stop the execution? Or had the system already decided his fate? As Young sat in his cell, awaiting what seemed like an inevitable end, his mind must have raced. Was this it? Was this how it ended for him? The wait was excruciating. And the truth is, the system doesn't always give time for second chances. The law might be clear, but what about fairness? What about compassion? The final hours before an execution are often the most emotional, not just for the person about to be put to death, but for the families involved, the legal teams, and even for those who work inside the prison system. The world was watching, and yet, there was still a sense that the clock was ticking down on something much bigger than just a death sentence. It was about a system that had already failed to ask some of the hardest questions: who deserves to die? And who deserves another chance? Stay with me because what happens next might just be the most shocking twist in this entire story. And trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. What happens when the system reaches its breaking point, and a man's life hangs in the balance? But before we continue, I want to know your thoughts. Do you think the system gave Christopher Young a fair chance, or was this just another case of a broken system? Drop your opinions below in the comments, and let's keep the conversation going. As the clock ticked closer to the execution hour, the state of Texas was preparing for yet another lethal injection. But for Christopher Young, the seconds felt like hours. His defense team, in a last-ditch effort, pushed forward with an emergency appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, begging for a stay of execution. But as the minutes bled into hours, the question on everyone's mind was it too late? Minutes before the lethal injection was to begin, an unexpected twist unfolded.
And for all
Just
of
when
you
it seemed like
to
there was
find
no hope
forgiveness
left,
in your
the families
hearts.
of both the victim and the condemned came together to plead for mercy. It was a rare moment of solidarity in an otherwise brutal and divisive case. The victim's family, Hasmukh Patel's family, had been vocal about their wishes for the death penalty to be commuted to a life sentence. Despite the pain of losing their loved one, they did not want to see another life taken in exchange. This wasn't a typical death penalty case where the victim's family simply sought retribution. Instead, Patel's family asked for mercy. They even spoke out publicly, urging the authorities to reconsider the execution. It was a powerful, emotional plea from people who had already suffered so much, and yet they chose forgiveness. Could the plea for mercy from the Patel family be enough to stop the execution? Was this the moment where the justice system would show that it had a heart, and not just a set of cold rules to follow? But mercy wasn't guaranteed. And as the hours ticked down, the decision was in the hands of a handful of people, officials who would either give Young one more chance or let the system carry out its brutal final decision. Inside the prison walls, the tension was palpable. Young, who had been on death row for years, was forced to come to terms with the fact that his life was about to end. He was given the opportunity to make a final statement, which would be his last chance to speak to the world. In his final words, he expressed remorse. He apologized for the pain he had caused, not just to the Patel family, but to everyone who had been affected by his actions. His words were a reminder of the complexities of the human condition. Was he truly sorry, or was it just a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable? But his apology didn't change the fact that the lethal injection was still scheduled. The minutes were ticking away. And then, just as the execution was about to begin, something extraordinary happened. A phone call came in from the governor's office. Was this the stay of execution they had been waiting for? Could this be the miracle they had been hoping for? It was a moment that had everyone on the edge of their seats. The tension in the air was thick with anticipation. Would this be the end of Christopher Young's story? Or would the justice system give him one last shot at life? In the final moments before the execution, it became clear, the decision was going to be made at the last possible second. No one knew what would happen next. Would mercy prevail, or would Texas execute another man in the name of justice? Stay with me, because what happened next shocked everyone involved. The final moments of Christopher Young's execution are not just about the death of one man, they are about what it means to be human in a system that demands an eye for an eye. You won't believe what happens next. But before we move on to the shocking conclusion, I want to know what you think. Should mercy have played a role in this case? Or should justice have been served regardless of the circumstances? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you can catch the final part of this story. The final moments of Christopher Young's execution were nothing short of tense, raw, and filled with uncertainty. With every passing second, his fate hung in the balance. For hours, it seemed like the system might finally show mercy, that perhaps the plea from the Patel family, combined with the last-minute evidence, could lead to a different outcome. But as the clock ticked closer to 6 p.m., it became painfully clear that the wheels of justice were about to turn once again, this time, in the direction of death. When the call from the governor's office came in, everyone holding their breath waited in silence. Would it be the news that Christopher Young's life was spared? Would the execution be halted? But in the end, no stay came. No reprieve. No mercy. And just like that, Christopher Young was led to the execution chamber. There, strapped to the gurney, with witnesses in the room, he faced what many would call the end of the line. The prison guards moved in, the room quiet but heavy with anticipation. Young had one final opportunity to speak. His last words were heartfelt and sincere. "I just want to say to Mr. Patel's family that I am so sorry for everything I have done to them. I really am. That was never my intent." It was a simple statement, but it was profound. He didn't try to justify what he had done or make excuses. He acknowledged the pain and loss his actions had caused. As those words hung in the air, the finality of the situation was undeniable. There was no turning back now. The lethal injection was administered. In just minutes, Christopher Young's life would be taken, and the state of Texas would have executed another man in its long history of capital punishment. The room was quiet. The air felt thick with the weight of the decision. As the injection flowed into Young's veins, his body slowly gave way to the effects of the drug. His eyes closed, his breath slowed, and soon, he was gone. It's a moment that is repeated in Texas all too often. Another man dead. Another sentence carried out. Another family left behind. But the real question remains, was justice served? Was Young's death the right outcome? Or was it another failure of a system that is supposed to protect the innocent while punishing the guilty? What happens after an execution? How do we, as a society, deal with the aftermath? How do we look at a man's death and reconcile it with the idea of justice? Christopher Young's case didn't just end with his death. It left the public with more questions than answers. What if he was innocent? What if he wasn't the same person who committed that crime 20 years ago? What if the system was broken, and he was a victim of it? Stay with me, because this isn't just about one man's execution. It's about a system that needs reform. It's about what happens when we become numb to death, and what we really stand for as a society. Here's the question I'm leaving you with: if we execute someone, are we truly delivering justice? Or are we just taking a life and calling it justice, because it's easier than admitting the truth? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Was this execution justified? Or was it another example of a broken system? If you want more stories that dig deep into the truth behind these cases, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to see it.